We are recording. You're good to go.
Okay, special meeting of North Smithfield Town Council, November 2nd, 2020 is called to order at 6:46 PM. First item is a prayer and a pledge. Madam Clerk.
Lord, assist with thy Holy Spirit of counsel all of those who are serving in positions of authority and responsibility.
Amen.
I pledge
Pledge
allegiance
allegiance
to the flag
of the
of the United States of America
and to the republic
for which it
stands,
one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
That was
roll call, please.
Mrs. Barnamoli,
Here.
Mrs. O'Hara,
Mrs. O'Hara called and told me that she was not feeling well, that she would not be with us this evening.
Mr. Ogier.
Here.
Mr. Zelinski,
Present.
Mr. Vadney.
Here. Next item is the open forum pursuant to Public Law 42-46-6, maximum of 15 minutes. Is there anyone out there wishing to speak under the open forum? Does anybody put their hand, Lillian?
I do not see that.
Is there anybody that's with us that would like to speak under the open forum tonight?
I have a comment, Mr. President, if I might.
Okay, go ahead.
I just want to say or comment, for those who have been here for early voting, I hope they found the process to be all they expected, and that it was clean, it was safe, and it was organized. I have to compliment our clerk and her staff for putting that together and keeping all of the different options and information flowing to try to help our citizens in a time where people are stressed, obviously, for a lot of reasons, and confused because of all of the different options with emergency ballots and early voting and mail-in ballots and applications and so on. I don't want to jinx tomorrow. I have every expectation that tomorrow will go just as smoothly as everything else has, but I didn't want to let it go for 2 weeks from now to say how pleased I am and proud of the work that the three people in our clerk's office have done, along with the help that they brought in. And the two folks that have staffed the early voting every day from 8 to whatever time have also just done an outstanding job. We've been very, very lucky.
Thank you.
Still no hands up, Ms. Scott?
Yes, sir.
No. Last call. Is there anybody out there wishing to speak under the open forum? If you do, please raise your hand on your Zoom screen and we'll acknowledge you.
Or just turn your camera on and physically raise your hand.
Mhm.
Nope.
Nope. Everyone ready to move on? This time I would entertain a motion to recess into executive session under the following: discussion by council vote or other action on any discussion or consideration related to the acquisition or lease of real property for public purposes or the disposition of publicly held property where in advance public information would be detrimental to the interests of the public. One, purchase and sale of 950 Old Smithfield Road, North Smithfield, Rhode Island, EP 13 Lot 25, in Rhode Island General Law 42-46-582, sessions pertaining to collective bargaining or litigation, or work sessions pertaining to collective bargaining or litigation. Potential litigation, contract with Calson Construction Corp. in regards to North Smithfield new town hall renovations. Is there a motion?
Move, Mr. President.
Motion by Mrs. Zelinski. Is there a second?
Second.
Barnamoli. Roll call vote.
Mrs. Barnamoli,
Yes.
Mr. Ogier,
Yes.
Mr. Zelinski,
Yes.
Mr. Vadney.
Yes. Can you put all the other?
Yep.
All the other folks back?
Everybody's in. You're good to go.
Everybody's back in?
Mhm.
Okay. We're back in open session. At this time, I would look for a motion to seal the minutes of the executive session and let the record show that no votes were taken. There a motion?
So move, Mr. President.
Motion by Mrs. Zelinski. Is there a second?
And-
Second by Mrs. Bonneville. Roll call vote.
Mrs. Barnamoli,
Yes.
Mr. Ogier,
Yes.
Mr. Zelinski,
Yes.
Mr. Vadney.
Yes. Next item, proposal to abandon portion of Stoney Drive, public hearing. Is there a motion to open a public hearing?
So moved.
Motion by Mrs. Bonneville. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Mrs. Zelinski to open a public hearing. This is the fourth public hearing that we have with the Zoom going on. It's we ask people if you want to speak. There's a hand raised that says you want to speak on your Zoom screen, or simply go on the camera and we could acknowledge you at that time. I'd be a little bit patient because sometimes more people have hands up. I can see most of everybody that's watching the meeting right now. So if I don't see you, just kind of like wave your hand a little bit better, and we will get to you. Just be a little patient. It's
St. Patrick thought about the Trinity by using a.
so. Is there anyone wishing to speak?
Bill Bernstein had raised his hand.
Mr. Bernstein,
Hi, good evening. Can everybody hear me?
can.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This matter was on for a work session several weeks ago, and the council had raised several issues that I tried to address. Hopefully, I addressed all of them in my letter to the council dated October 26th. I also included a chronology of how we find ourselves in this position today. I would like to dissuade anyone of the notion that this is a land grab. My client is more or less forced to make this request by necessity. And that is included in my letter, the chronology of when the home was built, and what ensued, what happened after that. So he discovered somewhat recently, when someone else did a survey of his property, that there was an encroachment into this portion of Stoney Drive that we are seeking to have the council abandon. It's out of necessity because the current situation certainly does not comply with the zoning setbacks. And indeed, a portion of his home and the driveway encroach into that portion of Stoney Drive. I included with my letter a series of approvals that came from the building zoning office. A CO was issued, inspections were done, and for one reason or another, nobody picked it up. The reason that's included is not to be accusatory, but to explain what the reason is that my client is seeking to have this portion of the drive abandoned. It's a unique situation. I've never run across this in my career, but be that as it may, this is the situation that we're in. I think my co-counsel, Marion Bevins, is here. She took copious notes of the workshop and some of the issues that she identified, as well as myself. I would just briefly like to go over. I assume that everyone got a copy of the letter.
I was just gonna ask you if we could clarify something, because I think that there's a miscommunication here. You had a hearing, or you had a workshop, I believe, with the planning board, not with the town council.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Because
Okay.
I don't have a copy of that letter that
No.
you keep referencing, and I don't believe anyone else has a copy of that letter. I believe that might have been issued to the planning board, not to the council.
No, my letter of 26 was sent to the town council. I had spoken with the clerk and,
I never received a letter.
well, it was
I remember
emailed.
speaking to you on the phone and you had asked for an email address, but I never received the letter.
All right, so with your permission, I'll read is it possible for me to read it into the record?
No, no. No, all this material should have been supplied, sorry, Mr. President, this material should have been supplied in advance. I do have,
That's what happens, wait
but I
until.
don't feel like I want to follow up on the questions because why wasn't it in the package? You referred to it as coming in the package. You're telling us we have it, we don't have it. You know, I sat on the planning board for many years. And if someone came before a planning board and started pulling out papers in the 11th hour, we didn't consider it. Now, I'm only saying no for myself. There's 3 other council members here.
I completely understand. I believe it was emailed, but obviously something went awry. I emailed it, I thought, to the clerk's office on the 26th of October. But if she didn't get it, then no, I'm not going to ask the council to proceed, because it's very important that this information be digested by the council before there can be any ruling on it.
Mhm.
I was quite positive I sent it, but obviously something happened. No, and I don't expect the council to make any kind of rulings unless and until this information is digested.
We appreciate that. I'm glad you understand it. Mr. Ogier, you have a comment?
Yeah, I was gonna say, I don't have a problem with him reading it, but, you know, I know we can't take action on it because it would be introduced at the meeting. Likewise, you know, obviously I would want to have some time to look it over and, you know, vet it for any questions I might have, but personally, I don't have a problem if he wants to read it. I know we've done it in the past many times, but, you know, like I said, I don't agree with taking action on it tonight, so.
No, and I would not, I'm an assistant solicitor in the town of Gloucester, and I would not expect any kind of action on something that the council does not have before it. What I will do, however, is I will hand deliver this tomorrow to your clerk, so that perhaps we can get it on for the next council meeting.
Verify your email address.
You could, I appreciate that you want to physically walk in and give her a hard copy of that, but I would ask you to wait a day. Tomorrow is election day.
Okay, yes,
The
That's
clerk is
fine.
gonna be pretty busy tomorrow. I'm sure it's gonna be a long day for her. If you could wait a day or two, it's not gonna impact getting on the agenda for the 16th of November. We can do that. That's not a problem. We're gonna continue the public hearing to that date.
okay.
So it's not like you're gonna have it tomorrow or we're not gonna hear it.
I will do this. I will make sure she has it by the end of the week. I'll try to email it again, but I will hand deliver it Thursday or Friday.
Okay, we appreciate that.
Thank
Mr.
you.
Ashambo.
Sorry for the misunderstanding.
That's all right. Mr. Ashambo?
Okay. It's very unfortunate that we are where we here, and I may not speak properly because I'm dumbfounded. It was an awesome letter, but I'd like to say a few things in regards to this before we meet again. My wife and I have been working for over 40 years, each allowing us to be in a position to purchase the home of our dreams some 8 years ago in North Smithfield. a town we have come to love, and a neighborhood we enjoy being part of. We moved from West Warwick to be closer to our grandchildren. Our home has now become the center of our extended family, hosting many gatherings, sleepovers, and holiday events. I have heard several times through this procedure, how could this have happened? Exactly, I say, how did this happen? We would have not bought our home, or anyone else would, under the present condition. I do not know of any homeowner that had their boundaries surveyed prior to any purchase. Most buyers, like we did, take it for granted that when a home is built, it conforms with all the local municipality zoning and building codes and laws. Permits are required, signed and approved prior to being built, and occupied with buyers having faith in the respective town, employees, and departments. I have copies of all permits and approvals for this home indicating that it was supposed to be conforming and inspected. We know that what was submitted and subsequently approved is not actually the case. Again, we can ask ourselves, how could this have happened? My wife and I are at our wits' end. The emotional and financial stress this is putting on us is becoming hard. We were wronged and had faith in the system that assures any homeowner this doesn't happen to them. I hope that you and any town representative see it actually is. I think that my wife and I were duped and an injustice needs to be corrected. I look forward to meeting with you again, and you said November 16th?
That's correct.
Thank you very much for giving me this time to voice my opinion.
You're welcome. Is there anyone else, Lillian, that wants to speak under the public hearing? We're going to continue it anyways, but if they want to speak tonight, they can speak.
No, I don't see anybody.
No other hands up?
Nope.
Okay. Is there a motion to continue the public hearing to November 16th of 2020?
So moved.
Zelinski, is there a second?
Second.
Second by Mrs. Bottomoli. We appreciate Mr. Bernstein and Mr. Ashambo, your understanding in letting us continue this. Till we have all of the facts and we can make a sound decision based on those facts. We appreciate that.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Roll call vote.
Mrs. Barnamoli,
Yes.
Mr. Rozier,
Yes.
Mr. Zelinski,
Yes.
Mr. Vadney.
Yes. On item B, discussion by council whether an action on proposal to abandon portion of Stony Drive, just continue this to the next agenda. There's no action taken tonight. Next up, old business, discussion by council or other action on update on municipal building review task force. The update is that the RFP that the council requested that we be done and that you folks authorized, the administration has put on a front and back page of it, and it has gone out to, will be advertised tomorrow, Gary?
Yes, it has been issued on our webpage and will be advertised tomorrow, due on November 13th.
So it's moving along, and that's all I got for an update tonight. Next item, discussion by council vote or other action on town ordinance section 6-3C, historic preservation, tax deferment and waiver ordinance. And we have a public hearing continuation. Is there a motion to reopen the public or to open the public hearing and to continue it?
Motion,
Mr.
President.
Zelinski, is there a second?
Second.
Second.
Second by Mr. Ogier and Mrs. Bottomoli. Roll call vote.
Mrs. Barnamoli,
Yes.
Mr. Rozier,
Yes.
Mr. Zelinski,
Yes.
Mr. Vadney.
Yes. The public hearing is now open. Is there anyone out there wishing to speak during the public hearing? Mr. Harris?
Good evening, town council members and town administrator. I'm just here to answer any questions that you may have regarding this so that we can sort out any of the issues that may be arising and anything that you may want to discuss related to this, being the chair of the Historic District Commission.
Anyone else out there?
Mr. Keene has his hand raised.
Mr. Keene?
Yes, good evening. So just a little bit of background on this ordinance. As you know, we asked the council to consider another ordinance that would give a tax deferment or and potentially a waiver to owners of significantly distressed historic buildings to try to save them from destruction or being demolished. But unfortunately, there wasn't any enabling legislation that allowed the council to act on that. So Mr. Igliozzi was able to find this tax credit legislation that does enable the town council to provide something similar, but this is going to be broader. It would apply to all historic residences within a recognized historic district. It's in the past, we've asked our property owners who own these historic residences to bear the brunt of maintaining and preserving these houses, these residences. And we've not offered them any type of relief. So essentially, they get to pay all of the expenses, and we get to enjoy the beauty of these historic districts in our town. And what we're asking you to consider is to help these people, these property owners, defray some of the cost of maintaining these houses. It's a considerable expense that they have to bear, and I think anybody who knows this town and appreciates the value that these houses bring to it. As a matter of fact, just the other day, I was over at Heritage Hall, and there was a couple in the parking lot standing there looking at the houses around them, and they happened to be from Portsmouth, Rhode Island, and they just had read about Slatersville and wanted to come and see it. So there is an attraction for an economic benefit, I think, of drawing people from other parts of the state, from other parts of New England to come to our town. I think this ordinance would do a lot of good. It would preserve a lot of the houses, the historic houses that we have in town. One final point that I'd like to make is back in 1980, the Rhode Island Historic Preservation Commission came into town, and they did a survey, what they call a preliminary survey, and they identified all of the significantly historic buildings in town. And since 1980, we've lost 15 of those historic buildings. Of the 15, 12 of them were bought by somebody and then subsequently demolished to build a new house because the buildings hadn't been preserved well enough to make it worth their while to keep the house. And so I think this ordinance again, would go a long way to preserving some of our most valuable historic buildings in town. So I'd ask your favorable consideration. Thank you.
Ian. Anyone else? Mr. Harris?
Muted. Okay. I'd just like to back up with what Rich is saying, in that we did have an ordinance that we were originally going to, it was sort of a different one. It was called a tax, waiver and deferment. This is based on the state enabling legislation, which essentially would be a 20% reduction over 5 years that would be instituted. And it's all based on what is in the state enabling legislation. And I just like to, we see a lot of cases of property owners, historic property owners who come to us, and they have to apply for a certificate of appropriateness to do work on their historic building if they're located within at least one of our local historic districts. This goes a little bit further, and it recognizes properties located within national historic districts, which is a little bigger reach, but it also allows those who are outside of our local historic districts to apply and be part of this. And it's kind of good in a way, because some of those properties would have to establish themselves as a local historic property, which in and of itself would not be a bad thing either. So that way we can all take care of how the preservation works for these properties. But I just want to add that there's been times that we've had them come forward to us, and sometimes what we require to help keep the buildings preserved as they would be, instead of covering everything with vinyl siding or demolishing or doing something that would demean the architectural integrity of the building. As you may know, and some of you from being in construction industry or et cetera, these issues cause a little bit more cost than usual of other types of rehab properties. And so we feel that we've always been the stick. I always look at it as the relationship of the carrot and the stick. And we as being the Historic District Commission are the stick, and we've always been searching for ways besides some kind of loan program or other ways to give a little bit of a carrot for those that are doing these things, so that we're not imposing such a stringent burden on them trying to improve their properties, which improves the district and improves the community. So that's part of the reason why we're really trying to stress. I mean, there's other avenues we're looking at about developing some kind of a revolving type loan program of sorts, and but those require a lot of effort in getting some seed money to get started. We've seen, I've done research that the state enabling legislation allows Warren and the town of Narragansett have formulated their own ordinance in town that mirrors the state enabling legislation. And the way that we're kind of looking at it is that Narragansett has one of the better avenues to take to sort of mirror what their ordinance does. And it pretty much blankets exactly what the state enabling legislation does. There was a couple of other issues we had with the state enabling legislation, and that was, we discussed this at our last meeting, in a joint meeting with the Heritage Association, that there was a minimum dollar amount to be spent to qualify for the program. And Narragansett has like a $10,000 limit. We looked at maybe starting with a $5,000 limit, but we eventually agreed to look at a $7,500 minimum to be qualified for the program. Now, that's obviously up for discussion by you folks and how you want to go forward with that. But I think that gives a little bit more background about what we're trying to establish here and trying to move forward with preserving our historic properties in town.
Thank you. Is there anyone else out there, Lily? that wants to speak under the public hearing?
I do not see anyone.
I know that last meeting, we had this up for second reading, and it wasn't in the right format because we didn't have enabling legislation to follow through on this thing. So my understanding is we went from having a deferred potential waiver of taxes is the tax credit that we're looking at. It's not just on certain homeowners, it's anyone in the district that can go forward with this route and do improvements to their historic home and seek a tax credit, correct? That's the biggest difference in the two things from last week to this week, or from 2 weeks ago to this week. Because
Yes.
we're piggybacking on enabling legislation, not having to try to rewrite our own enabling legislation.
That is correct.
Mr. Zelinski.
Thank you, Mr. President. David, I think, David, you had a lot, and probably Gary and Paul, you had a lot, and Richard and Mr. Harris did a lot to craft this. But if I could draw you, Lillian, can you go to line 103? Can you advance that? This falls under E, deferment and waiver process number 8. David, can you hear me?
Yeah, this is the one you're looking at. The proposed ordinance that's not the credit. This is not consistent with the enabling legislation.
Well, okay, so help me understand this. The reason I'm bringing this up, the town council may not authorize deferment of more than 25,000 combined for all distressed historic buildings under application with a defined restoration plan each year. So if I'm reading this, is this limiting to 25,000 for all the plans that come in?
Councilman, I think the confusion is that you're looking at the wrong document. This document is the proposal by the Historic Commission that's not supported by state legislation. The council cannot adopt any of this.
Okay.
The tax credit legislation, I've submitted all that to all the council and the clerk, I don't know, a week or two ago.
Okay, then my confusion is I'm reading something that state enabling would not support. Is that correct?
Right. What I was told was two things. One, I generated the proposed ordinance that the council could adopt, which was the tax credit, and I submitted that to everyone as well as the clerk. And then I also said, in addition to that, if the council wanted to consider pushing forward the proposed ordinance by the Historic District Commission and the Heritage Association, the first step would be to adopt a resolution and ask the General Assembly to pass enabling legislation. So the only thing I see in front of you on this sheet is that second piece. For whatever reason, I'm not seeing the ordinance that I provided.
Yep, that was my fault. I can get it up. Hold on 1 second. I'll get it up on the screen right now.
There's a resolution in our packet, Mrs. Zelinski, that would allow us to go with a deferment waiver.
Yeah.
But I really think that going with the tax credit is probably a better route to go. It's going to allow more participation, I think, by people and put it under state enabling, and that's going to follow national and state guidelines as opposed to our own. And you won't, there's already a standard that's set. So it won't be that a town council will say, we approve this one, we don't approve that one. The standard is already out there, national and statewide, on what's allowed and what's not allowed. And based on what I'm hearing, it's the maximum is a 20% credit that they can receive.
Okay, so I just want to make sure here, because what was attached was
a tax deferment.
Yeah, 141 lines of it. So I just wanted to make sure that, because when I was reading this, I'm saying we're limiting it to $25,000. And I didn't think that was enough, because we don't know how many applications were going to come in. Now we're going to be at a 20% deferment. Okay.
Well, the issue with the deferment, Paul, there were two issues. One is we didn't have enabling legislation, but that 25,000 was because they had to set a number that how much can we either defer or waive in total taxes in a year. That's what that number was for. And
No, I understand that.
without it hurting the revenue of the town, they had to put a limiter on it. And I get, yeah, it does make sense that does it need to be higher? We could always change that at a later date, but it's a kind of a moot point because we're not going with a deferment process anymore.
Okay.
Waiver.
Thank you.
Mr. President?
I'm perfectly clear. I'm in support of this. And I was looking at this and saying that, that may not be enough, but it's a moot point. Thank you.
Mr. Igliozzi?
Mr. Chair, I just wanted to point out that the two besides the tax credit ordinance that's before you, there was some email correspondence with the Heritage Association and the Historic District Commission about wanting to have more local control over the rehabilitation work. I submitted, and I think I copied you on that. I see that I think I did. I submitted that direct question to see if whether or not the state organization would have any objection to that. And we're waiting for an answer. They did not respond yet. So there are two things left with this ordinance. One is to determine the dollar amount to qualify that was spoken to by Mr. Harris and Mr. Keene. That's a council decision.
Yep.
And the second thing is you could pass it as is, but as is, the rehabilitation work gets approved by the state commission. That's the way the state enabling legislation that's before you reads. If we wanted to amend that, two things. One, I put a question in to see if there was a way, what the state commission's position was on it. And secondly, if you want to change that, that might require a modification. So you could pass this as is, add the percentage, the amount of qualification, but then you still, at least as it reads right now, the review process goes to the state commission.
And I think
I just want you to be aware of that.
Yeah, I think that I've dealt with the Historic District Commission when we did Kendall Dean over. I'm so familiar with the process of getting an approval from them and everything and what's required and everything. And I think that from my standpoint, it really needs to remain in the town's control of what we do using their standards, but that Historic District Commission should have the authority to go in and say, no, this is what we're looking for. This is what's allowed. This is what's not allowed. As maybe only as a go-between what the state is allowing and what we're looking for to make sure that they're in compliance. And I think that's really their concern, is that they want to make sure that whatever's done in the town is in compliance with things. Mr. Harris.
So just to go back with what Mr. Igliozzi was saying is I understand there was some confusion about what ordinance we're actually talking about. And I agree that I spoke with Roberta Randall, who's one of the historic preservation architects at the state, at the Rhode Island Historic Preservation and Heritage Commission. And she told me that they haven't had anybody work with this program or review anything under this ordinance, state enabling legislation. The only thing that she moved me to look at was Warren, the town of Warren, and what they have done. And they got passage through and got included in the state enabling legislation. And also listed in there was the town of Narragansett, which I had mentioned previously. So those two towns, they brought it into there as a local situation that they review the process, and they work with the tax assessor on all the different types of processes that need to happen in order for this to make this happen. But the Historic District Commission would sort of do the reviewing and the application process, and the tax assessor would do all the other work that's involved in making all that part of it happen, the administrative part. And we, looking at the town of Warren and the town of Narragansett, how they work there too, looking through theirs, I got to read it a lot more closer again. But they make the most sense. In the town of Narragansett, it makes the most sense about the way. So I believe what Mr. Iglesias is trying to get across is that we need to provide a resolution to the state to allow us to be part of this state enabling legislation. So that way we can develop our program and make it work for us as our unit, and not have the Rhode Island Historic Preservation Commission involved, which they haven't been doing anyway. So they don't have any kind of program, as I understand, established to work with this. Not that I don't think that they would do a good job, but I think that you're right. It would probably be best that we have our own people and take care of and look at these situations on a local level, because we're here dealing with it every day.
So David, if I can, and
Yep.
Jeff and Rich listen in on this. What I'm hearing is we don't need to pass an ordinance. There's already an ordinance, there's already a state law that allows us to do this. What we need to do is put a resolution in to get enabling legislation that adds the town of North Smithfield to that with our own set of rules or regulations.
Mr. President, may I weigh in?
Yep. I'm asking you that question.
Yep, that's not exactly right. And here's the twist. There is state enabling legislation that says any city and town may adopt an ordinance to give their qualifying properties a 20% maximum tax credit. Any city and town can do that.
Okay.
But in that state law, it says in Warren and Narragansett, they actually carved out authority for them to control the process. Everybody else has to go to the state.
Okay.
So if we want to do that, if we're going to go just with the tax credit process, we still need to amend the state law to say what Mr. Harris and Mr. Keene want is that when it comes to the qualifying process and reviewing process of properties in the town of North Smithfield, the enabling legislation would say the town of North Smithfield can pass an ordinance that establishes a tax credit that allows the historic district committee to review the qualifying properties. And that doesn't exist in the state law right now.
Okay, so before we can even pass an ordinance, we have to get a resolution to the state for enabling legislation before we can even, because drawing up an ordinance isn't going to help us if the state doesn't give us, not that they're going to push back. Normally you send out enabling legislation, they approve it, it goes through. Unfortunately, they're not meeting right now either, which could be problematic, I guess, if we want to try to get something done. But based on what you're saying, we need a resolution first, get approval from the state, and then enact an ordinance.
I guess I'm saying that to this extent, Mr. President. If you want what Mr. Keene and Mr. Harris want, then the answer is yes. If you want a tax credit ordinance on the books in the next 30 days that allows North Smithfield to give tax credits to its qualifying properties, the answer is you can do that without any more legislation, but the state commission is the one who qualifies the properties, not the local commission. The state enabling legislation allows all cities and towns to do this, but you got to go to the state for qualifying. If you want to adopt an ordinance, you can adopt an ordinance right now. You have that option. But I think what Mr. Keene and Mr. Harris want is they want that change in the state law so that when you adopt an ordinance, it's one that allows the Historic District Commission to have the control over the qualifying of the property, the certification of the property. That's the thing that's missing. Warren and Narragansett had the state enabling legislation modified to say, with regard to us, we can adopt an ordinance that says we control the process. We don't, no other city or town has that authority under the state enabling legislation.
I understand that. That's what I'm saying. In order for us to do that, we need to go to the state with a resolution to see if they will enact enabling legislation, allowing the town of North Smithfield to oversee that program.
That's correct. That's
So-
precisely said correct. The
So
way you
it's-
just said it is right.
Right, so we don't need to do an ordinance, we need to do a resolution for enabling legislation. Mr. Keen, you're shaking your head no.
What I'd like to propose, and Jeff, if I'm wrong on this, but I think what we were hoping was that the town council would take the first step and adopt the ordinance as Mr. Rigliosi had drafted it, and then approve a resolution asking the legislature to amend the enabling legislation to allow the Historic District Commission to be the authority having jurisdiction in North Smithfield. So you could take the first step tonight and take the first step towards adopting the ordinance as is, and also then approve the resolution asking to amend the definitions that would allow the Historic District Commission to be the authority. So that's what I would prefer. I think, we would prefer that you do, is at least get the ordinance on the books. We can work with the Historic District Commission until such time that the legislature can take action on the resolution.
Okay. Mr. Harris?
That's exactly what I was going to say, and I agree with what Rich is saying, is that as an initial first step, let's try to get the state enabling legislation through as an ordinance. If that's how you want to proceed with it tonight, that's obviously up to you. That would be our first step, and concurrently, we would send the resolution if that's passes through the council. Send the resolution over to the state and try to get the approval for moving forward to have the town of North Smithfield be the qualifying authority having jurisdiction on qualifying properties.
Well, the reason I was looking for good clarification is we can do second reading on this ordinance that's been proposed. But we can't act on a resolution because it's not on our agenda. That's why I was looking for clarification on what we needed to do. And I'm okay if you're okay that we adopt the state's enabling legislation for the ordinance, and then we go back at a later date and set it up so it reflects what the town of North Smithfield wants. It's just I can't do a resolution tonight. That's why I wanted the clarification on what we really were going to do tonight. Mr. Ogier.
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, I totally support this initiative, and I think it's a great program and a great idea. And thank you to Mr. Harris and Mr. Keen for spearheading this. And I was going to suggest that we look to pass not the resolution, pass the ordinance tonight, and then look to work towards changing state enabling down the line. I know, as you just said, Mr. President, the state's not even meeting, and so I think anything we can do to kind of help protect the historic preservation of homes in our community, I think it's definitely an opportunity we should jump on.
Mr. President?
Mr. Rigliosi.
Just as a matter of procedure, if the council's going to go down that road, I would ask the council to do two things. One, obviously, you need to, you got to make a motion to amend what was filed as first reading with this substitute ordinance.
Mm-hmm.
That'd be a motion that'd be required. Then two, you need to add the qualifying amount in section 6-3.13.3B. You need to put that amount in there. And then I would ask that you only consider this. I would I would just consider it as a first reading and make sure that you put this down for the 16th for a second reading as amended. I mean, could you do it all tonight? I think you could. I just don't like the fact that we didn't even have it in the package tonight.
Okay,
That bothers me. It's just a matter of process. I mean, the public should make sure that they have a chance to see this.
understood.
Other than that, I think this ordinance is consistent with state law and would be a good first step, as the council would hopefully want to support it.
Then one other question then for, right now it's listed on the agenda for second reading.
Yeah, I would amend that, amend it, revise it, and then continue it as amended to the November 16th for a second
For
reading.
second reading, okay.
Right. But I would first amend what's before you, so what we just had, the confusion about what documents in front of you is clear. Then add the qualifying amount under that subsection.
Yep,
And then as amended, reassign it, the public hearing and the second reading to November 16th.
okay. I just want to make sure that we're going in the same direction.
If you want to do that, obviously. I'm not telling you what to do.
Okay, Mr. Harris? Jeff?
I just want to, Mr. Iglesias, question for Mr. Iglesias. You had prepared the resolution for the amended state enabling ordinance, correct? But they just don't have it in their packet. I'm just clarifying. So that would be presented at the next meeting?
Again, the resolution that I prepared was the resolution to ask the General Assembly to adopt the ordinance that you drafted.
Yes.
Now I'm being told for the first time that we're now asking for a resolution to have this state enabling legislation amended to carve out an exception to allow North Smithfield Historic District Commission to be the certifying agency under the legislation. So I have to make a different resolution for that.
Okay. I thought you had done one, but I
did do one, and
Okay.
I did do one, and it is in the package. It's just not listed on the agendas with the president.
Okay.
It's
Fair
not on
enough.
the agenda for us to take action, but it's listed for the preservation tax deferment and waiver, which we're changing that. We're gonna amend it to something different. So the whole resolution would need to reflect.
Just going to clean this up and
for.
put it on for November 13th,
16th,
16th, I'm sorry, 16th.
yeah. That's where we're going once we get out of the public hearing. Mr. Izowski.
Mr. President, members of the council, as the person who has to watch the revenue and expenditures, I look at this and say there will be a cost that the rest of the town picks up. And I think it's very difficult to assess that at this point, not knowing how many individual properties will look to benefit from it. And in fact, what the individual benefit to the property will ultimately be. I think we can go forward, we should go forward and with the hope that it produces the right thing. It can always be changed if it doesn't. So the cost thing is something that is there, but I think it will play itself out in time as we go forward. I am concerned about this circumstance of sending anything out of the town that we currently control. And I wonder if before your next hearing, we can find out if there are other communities that have adopted this ordinance or this program without the benefit of having their own control. Just as further information. Are we elevating the cost by making it happen in advance of getting the local control that the other two communities that were mentioned earlier out-of-town control becomes, we're effectively passing off a judgment on what to do with North Smithfield tax money to people that may have no roots in North Smithfield. Just my 2 cents.
Anyone else? Mr. Harris?
Yeah, I just want to respond to Gary because he makes a great point, and that's why when in our initial legislation, we proposed a mark where, maybe it's too much, maybe it's too little, but the 25,000, if we have local control over this, then maybe that's perhaps something that we could adopt into our ordinance as part of the program. It can always be changed over the years how we want to proceed with it. But that was one of the considerations that we discussed heavily, was how much is this going to weigh on revenues for the town if we're taken away? So, I mean, we're trying to balance between getting good quality properties in town. At the same time, we're trying to keep our revenues going and not disable any of that function as well. So that's the question.
Mr. Keen?
Yes, Mr. Ozowski raises a valid point. There is going to be a cost, no doubt. And there's no way to tell right now what that cost is going to be. However, the control of this ordinance, the tax assessor is actually the one who is going to administer the program as far as the finances go. The Historic District Commission is the one, right now it'll be if you adopt the ordinance, it'll be the state, the Rhode Island Historic Preservation Commission. Their job is going to be to determine if the work that's being done is appropriate and in accordance with certain standards for maintaining historic buildings, and making sure that when the job is done, that it was done in accordance with those standards. So it's really not anything. The fiscal aspect of this is handled by the tax assessor, not by the commission. So I just wanted to make that distinction. They're not really dealing with the dollars. It's the tax assessor who's going to be in charge of the fiscal aspect.
Tom, do you have any concerns? I know that it went to the planning board, you guys weighed in on it, but now that we've changed it a little bit, and I know you've kind of been in the loop on some of the changes.
Yeah, no, David was correct to make it consistent with Title 44 on taxation. The only thing I'll bring up is when I looked into this for Burrillville, Warren actually was one of the few communities that had a voluntary historic district. And I'm just curious if they still do. And that's why their amount is up to $1 million to kind of really incentivize it, because their district isn't mandatory. Yeah, it's just interesting. Like, whereas in North Smithfield, we have historic districts. So I'm just curious as we look at this more, I'm going to look into that and see if that's still the case. I don't know what Narragansett has, whether it's voluntary or mandatory.
Mr. Harris?
Just for the research I did, Tom, yeah, I did notice that Warren was a voluntary historic district commission. I don't know exactly what that means in terms of how they work and relate, but Narragansett is an historic district commission recognized by the state, and it has local ordinance for that. The town of Warren, I had noticed that about a year or so ago, they were looking to drop voluntary from there, because I believe they do have historic districts that have been mapped out, but I don't know how they work under the name, it being Warren voluntary. That's an interesting question. I'll look into that too. Thanks.
Mr. Keen?
Yes, I had a chance to talk with one of the women that works at the Historic Commission in Warren at last year's annual Rhode Island conference, their annual preservation conference. You may, if you read the state enabling legislation, it considers commercial property in the town of Warren, and I also believe it's in Narragansett. Warren revitalized a lot of their business district using this program, and I think that's why you see such large numbers, like $1 million, or the right now the enabling legislation allows up to 5 years of this 20% credit, and then I believe in Warren it goes up to nine years. Again, I think a lot of the work that was done in Warren under this program was done for commercial properties. So we're looking at we're proposing that it stay with residential properties in North Smithfield.
Anyone else? Mr. Igliozzi.
Mr. President, 2 points. One, to the administrator's point of cost. On the screen, you see section A under 6-3.13.3. This is language from the enabling legislation that says the town may provide up to 20% reduction in tax liability. If the council wanted to provide less, they could provide less. That 20%, you ultimately need to make a policy decision here. Instead of will provide up to 20%, that's up to you. You could say up to 10%. So I just want you to know, if you're concerned about cost, that while you can't provide more than 20%, you could provide less than 20%. That's number one. And number two, we're doing an awful lot talking about Warren, who has a special exemption in here with regard to commercial property for $1 million. That's Warren only. Narragansett exception just allows the Narragansett Historic Commission to be equivalent, to be the entity controlling the historic residential process. And that's, we're kind of comparing apples and oranges. I just want you to be aware of that. These are the decisions that you can make right here on the page. You have no authority to, at this point, to consider commercial property like Warren, and you have no authority to have your local historic commission approve the project right now. Those things are where you are right now. I just wanted to make sure we get back to what the council needs to look at before they act. That's all.
Okay. Anyone else out there wishing to speak? What I'd like to do is continue the public hearing for till 2 weeks from now on the 16th.
Mr. President, I would ask you to make sure that you substitute this legislation so it's advertised in the docket with this new legislation.
And you have to do that in the public hearing?
No. Well, technically, yes. Technically, yes. You got to do it in the public hearing. You've got to substitute. Absolutely. Yes.
Okay. Well, then we won't continue it right now then.
Right.
I don't want to get this wrong. I want to keep it moving forward because it's a worthwhile thing that we're looking at. I was okay when it was deferred or waived. I was okay with that process because it kept it in-house, it kept it in the town, kept it under our control. I was okay with that. It just, we didn't have the enabling legislation on the other side of it. So it was another hurdle that we had to cross. Now we're kind of going a roundabout way, taking the state ordinance, and then we want to go in with enabling legislation to allow local oversight using the state's guidelines.
Mr. President, I misspoke. As long as you're continuing the public hearing to the next meeting, when you come out of the public hearing, you can amend this, because it's listed on your agenda as a separate item.
Right.
Okay, I didn't just.
For second reading, and that's what you had told me. We could amend it. We could amend it and then put it back to second reading in 2 weeks.
And continue the public hearing as well.
Right.
Yep, you could do that.
Okay. So seeing no one else seeing no other hands up to speak, is there a motion to continue the public hearing to November 16th? Motion by Mrs. Zelinski. Is there a second?
Second.
By Mrs. Barnamoli. Roll call vote.
Mrs. Barnamoli?
Yes.
Mrs. Rozier?
Yes.
Mr. Zelinski?
Yes.
Mr. Vadney,
Yes. Now, discussion by council vote or action on second reading. At this time, I would entertain a motion that we amend the ordinance, the name right. We amend the ordinance Historic Preservation Tax Deferment and Waiver Ordinance and amend it to be, what was the name of the new one, David?
The Historic Residence Tax Credit.
That we amend it to be the Historic Residence Tax Credit. Is there a motion to do so?
So moved, Mr. President. Yes.
By Mrs. Zelinski, seconded by Mr. Ogier.
In the form attached, right?
Excuse me?
In the form that's on the screen.
Correct. In what's been submitted. Any discussion? Roll call vote.
Mrs. Barnamoli?
Yes.
Mr. Rozier?
Yes.
Mr. Zelinski? Mr. Vadney,
Yes. And we also, David, do we need to look at that section 6.3.13.3 for the qualifying amount? Do we need to look at that, or because it says no greater than, we're okay until we decide another number?
Right, you can leave it that way, and that means somebody comes in and you will give somebody up to 20%.
Right. We could give them up to 20%. Doesn't mean we have to.
Well, if you leave it the way it's written right now, it's shall. It's will give it to them.
If you just put may in there, it covers it.
Okay, that's what we want to do then.
Yes.
But if you do that, how are you going to determine, and I just throw this out, how are you going to determine whether you give somebody 10% or 20%? I think the neighboring legislation, I put the language in here this way because it's a policy decision. I think you ultimately have to decide how much, unless you're going to have to at some point determine how much you got to treat everybody equally.
Right.
You can't say somebody's going to get 5% and somebody's going to get 20%.
Right. I understand that.
Okay.
It can't be by project. It needs to be set. It needs to be set by ordinance.
Right. Doesn't have to be tonight, but it's something the council needs to decide. Just like they need to fill in the blank in B. Those are two policy decisions the council needs to make. How much will the tax credit be up to 20%? And how much will the qualifying, what needs to be spent on the property to even qualify as an applicant?
Okay, and so those can be done in 2 weeks, though.
They can be done in 2
weeks. More information, we can do those in 2 weeks.
Right.
Okay.
I believe Mr. Harris quoted the amount to be $7,500, Mr. Harris? Was that Narragansett?
Narragansett, I believe, is at 10,000, and we looked at initially maybe 5,000, but we agreed to do 7,500. But that's obviously our recommendation. That's something for you to think about.
Okay, North Smith. Okay, thanks.
So we've amended the ordinance, correct?
Correct. Well, there was a vote on it, Mr. President.
Yeah, right. We're still in discussion. We're still in discussion on that. Correct? We didn't vote on that yet. correct, Ms. Scott?
You voted to amend the
Okay,
ordinance already.
we did vote to amend it.
Okay.
We've replaced all the verbiage from tax deferment to a tax credit
Mhm.
as submitted to us.
Correct.
So now I'll look for a motion that we continue for second reading to November 16th. Is there a motion to continue this for second reading to November
The
16th?
ordinance as amended to a second reading.
So moved.
Well, Mr. Igliozzi's language, so moved.
Motion by Mrs. Bottomoli, seconded by Mr. Zelinski. Any other discussion? Roll call vote.
Sorry, I wanted to make sure I wrote it down right. Mrs. Barnamoli,
Yes.
Mr. Ogier,
Yes.
Mr. Zwelinski,
Yes.
Mr. Vadney.
Yes. And the solicitor, you will have, or I'll kind of leave it to the three of you, Mr. Igliozzi, Mr. Keenan, Mr. Harris, to have the right verbiage for us in 2 weeks on what we're actually looking for, so we can put them in for second reading and wrap it, and then we'll work on a resolution to send to the state. So David, if you could draft a resolution reflecting that, and we'll make sure it's on the agenda so we can do second reading, and then we'll do a resolution so we can send it for enabling legislation to reflect that we wanted to leave it in the town's control, similar to Narragansett.
Yes. That's easy enough to do. I'll have that, I'll give that resolution to the clerk as well.
Okay, thank you. So we're all set on that now, right?
Mr. Keen has his hand raised.
Mr. Keen?
Yes, in regards to the resolution, we had discussed actually three changes to definitions in 44-4. One of them was to give the Historic District Commission local jurisdiction over the program. The second one would add barns or outbuildings for any of the farms that we have in town. I think we have 2 left that actually still raise cattle, not counting rights, but they destroyed, really, they don't have historic buildings there anymore. They've replaced them all with new ones. So, but Martin's Farm, Gardner's Farm, and there may be one other of these old barns that we would like to see considered along with the historic farmhouse that's on that property. So, you know, it's again, significant expense for them to maintain these things. And they're down to just 2 or 3 in town now that would like to try to preserve. So that was one of the changes to the definitions that would allow these structures to be considered as part of the tax credit program. There was a third one I was just looking for. I can't find my paper, but I'll if you would indulge me, I could provide it to Mr. Igliozzi and as a proposal for consideration next month or the month after.
That's what we'd like, is for you guys to weigh in on this, and you know, we want your input on this. You guys have been behind it from the start. You guys deal with it on a regular basis, so we're looking for your input on how best to address this. So
thank you very much.
So we thank both Heritage Association and Historic District Commission for the time that they've spent, both their boards. I know that they've spent some time, they've had meetings, they've had joint meetings. I think they can see there's a light at the end of the tunnel. We're getting there. We're getting to where we need to go on this. It's going to be helpful to everybody. So thank you, guys.
Thank you very much for your support.
Next item, new business. Discussion by council vote or other action on zoning amendment, section 6.19, water supply protection overlay district. Mr. Kravitz.
Yeah, the council should have a memorandum from the planning board dated September 9th that pretty much explains the premise behind the changes, which for the audience, is to make the overlay zone map graphically easier to interpret. And also the other major change is to carve out or exempt certain existing industrial areas, namely Industrial Drive mostly, and the future Branch Village redevelopment area, which has a pretty intense land use program going forward. Looks to carve out those areas to promote, there are a number of small applicants that I have waiting in the wings to do additions and things like that. So this is an area of town that's already had a historic impact of groundwater impacts, and we want to rely on and promote investment in those areas. It seems efficient to do that from a land use perspective. If you want to encourage growth, do it in an area where there's a historic pattern of industrial development. And this will actually help subsidize the town's tax base in a manner that will allow us to do more preservation in area where the groundwater is pure. So that's kind of the way the administration is looking at this. And that's really all I should say about it for now. If there's questions, so you can open it up to the public.
Okay, well, we got a public hearing, so I just wanted you to give us a lead in on it. Is there a motion to open a public hearing?
Moved.
Motion by Mrs. Zelinski. Is there a second? Second by Mrs. Montemioli. So we've opened a public hearing for the zoning amendment, section 6.19, water supply protection overlay district. Is there anyone out there wishing to speak in the public hearing on this? Ms. Scott?
Don't you have to vote? Don't we have to do a roll call vote to open the public hearing?
We can do that. Roll call vote.
Okay. Mrs. Barnamioli,
Yes.
Mr. Ogier,
Yes.
Mr. Zelinski,
Yes.
Mr. Vadney.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thanks for keeping me on my toes. Is there anyone out there wishing to speak in the public hearing? Nobody out there?
All cameras off, no hands raised.
There's not that many people out there either.
Nope.
Mr. Rizal,
Kozowski has his hand raised.
I see him.
Thank you. What the planner and planning board all involved to date have done with this, I think, is an effort to streamline our regulations in places that really need it. The perfect demonstration of how it needed to change was carried out in a project that tried to move forward and ultimately was approved, but took just many months more in the way of time to move forward because of a lack of clarity in one line, the location of one line as it relates to this ordinance. And I think what we all want is regulation that is clear, predictable, and reliable, so that people can know what they can do and know what they can't do. And as what has been put before you, I think, is an effort to make sure that we make the process clear, predictable, and reliable without jeopardizing anything that is of premium value to the town. Our industrial park has the burden of some issues from decades ago, the 1960s, that took place at both ends, the north and the south end of that, or rather the east and the west side of that, with groundwater problems that will linger for many more decades, if not. And what we've done is said to that entire parcel is that we're going to hold you to a higher standard to make sure that we can drink that water at some point. The reality is that isn't where our potential drinking water source of the future is, by any stretch, by virtue of both the way that it has been impacted, the risks that are in it, and the geology that is in it. the resource that we ultimately, and the premier resource that we need to protect is west of Providence Pike, not to the east of Providence Pike. And these lines were drawn with information that was based on 1960s and 1970s type identification by DEM as to area stops and where a GA area starts. If those lines were drawn today, I'm very confident they would be substantially different from what we see even today in the DEM maps. I think this is a step forward to make sure that our industry is able to do what it needs to do in today's world. And we also should know that there are regulations that didn't exist back when these issues took place that exist now, like our local emergency planning council that requires all of the entities in the park that have hazardous materials, or anywhere in town, frankly, that have hazardous materials in their buildings to declare those materials to both the state and the local resource, in this case, the local fire department, to make sure that firefighters are amply protected when they respond to issues. And so we know so much more today about where the materials are and how they're stored, and there's so much less in the way of hazardous materials. We shouldn't let this issue be getting in our way. I encourage your passage of this change in the ordinance.
Councilors, any comments, questions?
I have a question. So we're looking at this memorandum that is dated September 9th. But in our packet, we also had an email that was dated October 26th concerning some of these changes. Were those, since this email came, and it came directly from just one member, has the planning
Yeah,
board?
but the letter, clarify, the letter is not from a zoning board member as a member of the zoning board. He's just sent it as an individual.
Okay,
Not
all right.
representing the
So
zoning board.
he's
You need to
zoning versus
clarify that.
planning. He's zoning versus planning.
Well, and if I might, Mr. President,
Go ahead.
I think his letter actually demonstrates how much of a concern this ordinance is, especially in that park, and that it's requiring people to be something that they're not.
Correct.
It's a very high bar that we're trying to place. And I offer to you that, while, the world has changed in terms of hazardous materials management since, some of this thought process was put in place. The amount of material that's disposed today is something less than, well, it's at least reduced by 80% from what was happening in like the 1980s and early 1990s. The amount of material that is wasted or disposed in terms of hazardous bulk, because people have shifted away from these compounds, and they don't want the trouble. But there will be still small quantity use, and we can't say to people, you can't be in our park if you're going to, use this or use that. Those are, we just get into minutia that is not in our interest as it relates to this kind of a business park.
Okay.
Yeah, we needed to be clear on that letter. Even though he's a zoning board member, he's not representing the zoning board in this case. It's his own opinion based on his experiences. Anyone else from the council? Is there a motion to close the public hearing? No motion to close the public hearing? I'll make a motion that we close the public hearing. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Mrs. Bonioli. Discussion? Mr. Ogier.
So are we voting to accept these changes tonight?
Yes, this is second reading.
The other question I had then, if on the discussion is, are there any other communities where, like, so I guess first, is this area primarily industrial drive, or is this also by 146? So that area, is that the area that we're defining in this, we're really targeting in these changes? Because I know that at first that's the area I'm trying to understand, because I looked at the map and, it's not really, I'm just trying to understand in relation to the recharge zones and, the reservoir wound socket and those types of areas, where exactly are these changes going to cause the impact? And before we vote, are we thinking long-term as to what potential impacts could be down the line? Again, I'm for streamlining ordinances, but just to streamline and to make it more efficient, yes, we have to do things to bring in commercial development, but we also can't position ourselves to potentially create a bigger problem down the line. And I know that's an argument that not everybody wants to hear, but I mean, if we don't stop and slow down and actually pump the brakes and really make sure that these things are thought out, we're just going to be creating a nightmare that a future council is going to have to pick up the burden, or the town's going to have to handle. I mean, I guess I just wanted to know that that's kind of what I'm thinking about in terms of where exactly is this going to be making the most impact, or what is the targeted, aside from the branch village project.
I can take a stab at that, Mr. President.
Tom?
Yeah. In the map that you have, it looks something like this one.
Yeah.
On the paper, basically the whole southeastern portion of town, which is a hatched area with lines going through it. That's the Crook Fall Brook watershed. That's the surface watershed from a surface water perspective, is what serves flow to the reservoirs, both 3 and number 1. To the northwest is where Branch Village is, and of course Industrial Drive. Those are part of the larger Blackstone River watershed, which contributes water to the Blackstone. But from a surface drinking water protection, that southeastern portion of town, the Crook Fall Brook again, yeah, there it is here, with the hatched lines. That's not going to change. Any project that comes up still has to go before the zoning board for a special use permit if it's in that hatched area. So that's the ordinance is not changing with respect to how it's protecting the drinking water resource. It's really trying to speak to that exemption in the pink areas that you can see in the north central to western piece, to simply try to nurture existing industrial activity that wants to expand. That, like Gary says, they still have to list any materials that they may have to store, if that should even come forward. They've got to engage civil engineers to design a stormwater process that's safe. All that still has to happen before the planning board. So that's one way you could look at it.
Thank you, Tom.
Anyone else? There's a motion and a second to close the public hearing. Roll call vote.
Mrs. Barnamoli?
Yes.
Mr. Ogier?
Yes.
Mr. Zelinski?
Yes.
Mr. Vadney?
Yes. Next is discussion by council vote or other action on second reading on zoning amendment section 6.19 water supply protection overlay district. Is there a motion to approve second reading?
So moved.
Motion by Mrs. Bottomoli. Is there a second? I will second for discussion. Tom, just so everyone is clear, we're really drawing better lines on where our overlay district should be, correct?
Yeah,
there are some language changes, but basically we're drawing better lines so we have better definition when it does go to the zoning board, that they can read a map more clearly.
That's certainly part of it. Cynthia has the map up. Lillian has that map up.
Yep.
That's a big part of it.
Because I know I saw firsthand that we had a business in town that was looking to expand, and that's the one that the guy was talking about, and it dragged on because what line is this? Where is this boundary? Where is that boundary? And it created a lot of confusion. And the bottom line is, you had an existing business that did not have to comply with the new standards. He was going to build a new building that would have been far superior than what he had as far as retaining water and underground infiltration and the whole bit and everything. And they were pushing him that he could have just stayed where he was and not had to do any of these improvements because we couldn't read a line better. And that's what the whole thing came down to. And it took months. And the only reason that I saw it is because I had to go to those meetings because I was trying to get a variance on my own property. That's why I saw it happening. And it was frustrating for me as a leader of the town to sit there and say, we need to treat our businesses a little better than this. We need to understand what they're looking to do and try to work with them to find solutions to them when we don't understand. I mean, the reality is they hired an expert to come in and verify where the lines were. And then they argued with the expert that said, no, you're reading the line wrong. It was really ridiculous. And so I think this is adjusting some of the language to reflect that, but it's also drawing lines that are better defined so that we don't have that ambiguity as we go forward.
Yeah, we have eliminated references to the RIGL system. That's the Rhode Island GIS. And that's because those maps, they change frequently. The data is presented differently. And it's really not proper to link a zoning code to an external document that can be changed by that separate agency. So that's the other thing we did right in the text.
And for the record, Mr. President, Tom, just want to make sure that I have the right map in front of me. It's a RIGL map produced by Town of North Smithfield, Rhode Island, 2/14/12, February 14th, 2012, and map revised August 24th, 20. Is that?
Yeah, that's the one.
Okay, thank you.
The legend, if you look at the legend on it, we're now making the surface drinking water supply watershed, Crook Fallbrook watershed is actually listed there now. And we put that in the text as well. I wanted to actually call out the Crook Fallbrook watershed to make sure there's no confusion with the sub watersheds of the Blackstone, which are the Peter Rivers to mouth. That's been clarified now in the text too.
Any other comments? Questions? There's a motion and a second for second reading. Roll call vote.
Mrs. Barnamoli?
Yes.
Mr. Rozier?
No.
Mr. Zelinski?
Yes.
Mr. Vadney,
Yes. Next up, my paperwork back in order here. There we go. Discussion by council vote or other action on school bonds. Number one, Gilbane Building Company invoice number J08248.000-11 dated October 6, 2020, signed off by the superintendent, facilities director, the OPM, Bob Gervasini, as well as Mr. Lombardi from the school committee, the amount of $204,942.37. Is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
So moved.
Motion by Mr. Ogier, seconded by Mrs. Barnamoli. Under discussion, I'm just curious, Gary, I don't know if you know, I can't really figure it out, what job this is tied to it, because it just says North Smithfield Schools. And normally we see them, it'll say, science classrooms, NSES, and then the new one behind it is the locker rooms and window replacement. I'm just curious if we know exactly what project this is tied to.
I can't for certain tell you, Mr. President, that this invoice is for the windows or the locker rooms, but it is that work that is, I believe that is the work that it is for.
Okay. Any other discussion? Hearing none, roll call vote.
Mrs. Barnamoli?
Yes.
Mr. Rozier?
Yes.
Mr. Zelinski?
Yes.
Mr. Vadney,
Yes. Item 2, Gilbane Building Company invoice number J08248.010-18 dated October 6, 2020, has all the appropriate signatures. It is for North Smithfield locker room renovations and partial window replacement in the amount of $98,502.32. There a motion to approve?
So moved.
Motion by Mr. Ogier. Is there a second? Second by Mrs. Bottomoli. Discussion? Hearing none, roll call vote.
Mrs. Barnamoli?
Yes.
Mr. Ogier?
Yes.
Mr. Zelinski?
Yes.
Mr. Vadeney?
Yes. And number 3, J. Solisi and Sons, Inc. invoice number 35739 in the amount of $38,800. It does have all the appropriate sign-offs on it. Is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
Motion by Mr. Ogier, second.
Second.
Second by Mrs. Bottomoli. The amount was 38,800, correct, Ms. Scott?
Yes.
Is that the right amount? 38,800? That's what I said the first time, right? What?
I think so. That's what I wrote down.
Okay. Any other discussion? Roll call vote.
Mrs. Barnamoli?
Yes.
Mr. Ogier?
Yes.
Mr. Zelinski?
Yes.
Mr. Vadeney?
Yes. Next, discussion by council vote or other action on scheduling a public hearing for the Council 94 AFSCME AFL-CIO Local 937 contract extension for a 1-year period. We do have a cover letter from the Budget Committee that has reviewed it with their analysis of the fiscal impact statement, as well as a copy of the redlined contract going forward. And so I'd look for a motion to have a public hearing on November 16, 2020 for ratification. Public hearing and then a vote for ratification on November 16, 2020. There a motion?
So moved.
Motion by Mrs. Bottomoli. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Ogier. Discussion? Hearing none, roll call vote.
Mrs. Barnamoli?
Yes.
Mr. Ogier?
Yes.
Mr. Zelinski?
Yes.
Mr. Vadeney?
Yes. Next, discussion by council vote or other action on abatements. Mr. Aces.
This comes from the recommendation of the tax assessor for a total abatement of $4,364.29.
You've heard the recommendation of the finance director. Is there a motion to approve abatements in the amount of $4,364.29?
So moved.
Motion by Mrs. Zelinski. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Mrs. Bottomoli. Discussion? Hearing none, roll call vote.
Mrs. Barnamoli?
Yes.
Mr. Ogier?
Yes.
Mr. Zelinski?
Yes.
Mr. Vadeney?
Yes. And you have something else?
Yes, there's also a supplemental that came as a separate,
Yeah.
and that was to offset one of the accounts on the abatements that was billed to the developer and now was bought. And that's for the amount of $3,084.16.
So you've read the recommendation of the finance director for a supplemental bill of $3,084.16. Is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
Motion by Mrs. Bottomoli. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Zelinski. Discussion? Hearing none, roll call vote.
Mrs. Barnamoli?
Yes.
Mr. Ogier?
Yes.
Mr. Zelinski?
Yes.
Mr. Vadeney?
Yes. Next, discussion by council vote or other action on reservation approval and review of unassigned fund balance. Mr. Aces.
We put a list together of projects that were either not done, not completed, and that we would like to ask your vote to propose to be committed to the town council reservations for fiscal 2020. The list is listed there, and also there's also some ride funds that were in the capital account that we would like to transfer over to Fund 60 for the school to use for future projects that are being reimbursed by RIDE.
Do you have a
I'm sorry?
do you have a recommendation or numbers and what were
We'll
the
need the
numbers
other-
with it?
Oh, it's the other screen. I'm sorry.
Oh, sorry. This one?
Right there. I'm sorry, right there.
Sorry.
So it's the total to be committed to the reserves is $811,326.84. And to be reserved in Fund 60 for the RIDE revolving account would be $103,858.16.
For the recommendation of the finance director? There a motion to approve?
So moved.
Motion by Mrs. Bottomoli. Is there a second? I'll second for discussion. Are there any questions or comments on this?
Mr. President, there's one more detail, if I might, that is in the other slide. These things are largely just projects that you had approved that whether it's time or opportunity circumstance didn't allow to happen, or some, took place in early fiscal 21. I would hope that, these two, 811 and 102 are matter of fact at this point. The other piece of this is that there still is, with those reservations, there will be, and this is an estimate at this point, we're still, we don't have a final audit. It will take a few more weeks for the audit to be completed. I would hope that it will be completed by mid-December. But as you can see on the screen that is before you now, there is an additional, we expect to have $246,744 that will be added to the fund balance. And what we've done here is calculated the fund balance for you as it's defined in our ordinance. This circumstance gets confusing as you might see a fund balance calculation as provided by our auditors in government accounting speak. You will also see another one that is done by Moody's, where they do it with their own formula that polishes and fine tunes. What we have in place from an ordinance is in bold up at the top. The town will maintain an unassigned fund balance at a minimum of 12%, but not more than 16% of general fund expenditures in any given fiscal year. So if we depending on when we calculate that, you can mix and match things. I think what we need to do is recognize that what we should have, the objective, if you recall, when we passed that ordinance, the fund balance ordinance, was to have essentially, try to have 2 months of resources on hand to pay 2 full months of bills without any income. And so that's 1/6 of our annual budget, if you will. So what we've done here is just to help you see that if you calculated it at using the fiscal 19 budget and using the unassigned fund balance during fiscal 2019, that was $5,391,000. You had a fund balance prior to the year end fiscal 2019 of 12.26%. If you did the same calculation during fiscal 20, we had a fund balance that benefited from the audited transition and transfer of surplus in fiscal 19 into fiscal 20. So the new fund balance was $6,358,000, but the budget is now $45,066,000. You follow? So you wind up with a fund balance of 14.11%. Currently, absent the benefit of the audit, but what we're we're expecting the fund balance to be at year end is 6,605,058 on the fiscal 21 budget. Again, we're looking to have 2 months of the current year budget on hand at all times. That's what this targeted. So you run that calculation, and we with the addition of 246,744, we wind up with an estimated fund balance percentage of 14.14%. It's all just for your information. As you look at that other sheet that has the reservations, there still is funding that will be available to add to the fund balance. All dependent upon confirmation in the audit. And that also includes the circumstance of holding out our share of the purchase of the Souza property.
So basically that list for 811, 326, 84 is their encumbrances.
That's right.
Basically, yep.
They're more or less bills that we hadn't paid by the end of June, but we knew they were coming, so we encumbered the funds. That's all that really is just an encumbrance.
That's right.
Reservation, but
Basically,
it's really, it's an encumbrance, and the other part of it is just state aid that comes in, and that's what I'm assuming that's what Fund 060 is reimbursements to
From RIDE.
it's from RIDE, and so we're just reassigning it so that when those bills come due from Gilbane, we can pay them.
Right, the 103,000 was actually in capital. We had told them that we were gonna put 100,000 in that RIDE account, so it would be revolving. So when the bills are due and we get reimbursed, it just keeps going.
Yep,
And we're just asking to transfer that at this time.
okay.
And if I might again, Mr. President, if you look at the number that's in here for ice control, that $55,000 is what was discussed in the budget that we were holding over. We were going to hold over. We knew that we were going to have a surplus in that account and that we would hold it for this coming fiscal year. The request I think was for $135,000. We only approved, I don't know, maybe 90 or 80 or something on the order, and knew that we had, because we didn't use all of the salt last year, so we held it over. So that's what all of this is really just truing up all of the records. If you
Yeah, like road repairs and resurfacing. We know that there are funds there. We just didn't use them yet. So that we didn't use them by June 30th, but we're going to use them. So we moved them.
And the cruisers were timing. We got the bill in July.
Yep.
The SUV, the police cruisers. That was just timing.
Yeah.
You can, so on, yeah.
We knew the bill was coming. We just didn't have it yet.
Yes, we've done this each year.
Yep. Any other discussion? Roll call vote.
Mrs. Barnamoli?
Yes.
Mr. Ogier?
Yes.
Mr. Zelinski?
Yes.
Mr. Vadney,
Yes. And the last, discussion by council vote or other action on budget transfer for DPW fuel facility upgrade and DPW groundwater remediation project. Mr. Jesus.
Okay, so these are monies that were reserved and we have to use all of the money. For instance, tax rate impact study, we had $2,500 left over on that. The increase to PRISM, we actually got a grant for that. So those were funds that are available, and the IT equipment needs were the needs that we were going to need in the new building. We are asking to transfer $16,700 to for the DPW fuel facility upgrade, and $15,000 for the DPW groundwater remediation project.
If I might, Mr. President.
Go ahead.
I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
Okay. On the DPW fuel upgrade, there are two things here. One is when we approved the contract to Green Site Services, that has nothing to do with green development, by the way. That is where we have signed the contract. I indicated to you that there were additional items that I would be coming back to the council on. This is one of these issues is that the fence that needs to be put in around that those tanks that doesn't exist now is a code circumstance. I had hoped to have final approval on the knowledge of the demolition of the Stamina Mill building by EPA to the point that we wouldn't need any of that budget that is still appropriated to that. I do, what has happened in the last few days, I do have, I'm probably at 95% certainty at this point that EPA is going to take that building down totally at its cost. But I get concerned that there might be some things left over for us to do that will have to be done, like perhaps a fence, continuation of the fence. I haven't absolute certainty with EPA that they're going to do that yet. But so we may still need some of the money that's been appropriated for that. We had to go looking around to find other funds. The other thing that in going through and starting up the project, the contractor advised that encouraged that we consider coating the two existing above ground fuel tanks. And that is recommended, actually, it's recommended by Convolt every 3 to 5 years, and we've never done it. These tanks are 20 years old. So what you're looking at here is funding that would allow the fence to be installed around the enclosure at actually $500 less than his bid price. I was able to get him to pull that down a little bit, and an addition of $5,700 to be able to coat the two tanks to preserve the concrete encasement such that we get a longer life out of those two tanks. On the second piece of this, the groundwater remediation project is something that I'm not sure that how many people are aware, but there has been an issue at the DPW facility for, well, since I would say the early 90s, from underground storage tanks that were taken out back in the 90s. And I can't say why or how it has gotten to grow or to extend this long, but it has. And when I first sat in this chair, I looked at the costs that were coming in to just continue monitoring this thing that wasn't going away and said, this is silly. If I had ever done that with one of my customers, that was one of the major oil companies, they would have thrown me out on my head faster than I could even think, because it has told us year after year after year that the concentrations that are in the groundwater at the DPW facility are stuck. And you've got to do something in the ground to get them done and to get them out. Well, we have done some things. For example, just 2 weeks ago, we did the second round of excavation out there that I put forward to be able to try to knock this thing out. And we have to dispose of the soil that came out of the ground for that. And the long-term benefit will be that I'm with some certainty that with a few more rounds of groundwater sampling, we will show the groundwater is compliant. And there is only one other thing. It's an old hydraulic oil issue that release that took place in the garage that's proved some to be persistent. And we're going to use a vacuum truck to try to eradicate that over the coming weeks, coming up soon. So we need to look that straight in the eye. And with this budget, we can finish the disposal of that soil, set up the vacuuming of this well interior, and manage some of the other consulting as it goes forward over the next year I certainly can't guarantee, nor can the consultant that's working with us on it, that it will absolutely be gone. But we're giving it one good shot to make sure that we stop monitoring and put this all behind us. So those are two projects. We have done some major improvements around the DPW facility over the past 3 years, and made it as it relates to hazardous materials storage, salt storage, well, 2 years before, and just management of that entire yard and how things are disposed. And I encourage you to approve these two transfers.
Heard the recommendation of the finance director and the administrator. Is there a motion to approve?
So moved, Mr. President. Yes.
Motion by Mrs. Zelinski. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Mrs. Bottomoli. On that second issue with the groundwater remediation project, Gary,
Yes, sir.
on the budget committee back in 2010, there was a significant number that was in the budget. And we questioned like, what are we paying this monitoring for? And it was like, oh, we need to monitor this. So if we remediate the problem, we can eliminate a cost that we've been incurring for years and years and years. That goes to your point that why wasn't it looked at? But it's been in the budget year after year after year. Oh, we need to monitor this. We need to monitor this. And it's not what I do, but it's what you do. It's what you did for a living. And so you understood it probably better and said, hey, we can eliminate this problem and save money in the long run. So it's something that we're looking at it and we're moving forward on it.
The plan that was before me was $25,000 worth of monitoring and risk assessment back in 2016. I just said no. And we took a different path. And
Some of it's done in-house, correct?
Yes. Oh, yeah. You know, the digging that was done out there recently was with DPW personnel with an outside consultant to guide. And prior to it, I was able to do that one myself. But, you know, I have great expectations for this, that it'll put it all behind us.
Good. Any other discussion? Roll call vote.
Mrs. Barnamoli,
Yes.
Mr. Ogier,
Yes.
Mr. Zelinski,
Yes.
Mr. Vadney.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Last item, motion to adjourn. Your motion to adjourn? Motion by
So
Mrs.
moved.
Bottomoli. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Ogier. Roll call vote.
Mrs. Barnamoli,
Sorry, yes.
Mr. Ogier,
Yes.
Mr. Zelinski,
Yes.
Mr. Vadney.
Yes.
Good
Thank
night,
you all.
Good all.
Have a good
No.
night.
Good night.
Thank you.
Tomorrow.
Night,
and
everyone.
Good luck.
tomorrow.
Good luck
Good
tomorrow,
luck.
everyone.
Have a
Thank
good day
you.
tomorrow.
Thank you.